Well, we're going to do a little introduction for you. So Lane Santa Cruz has represented the West Side, South Side, and downtown of Tucson in Ward 1 since 2019. She is a second generation Tucsonan, born and raised in the South Side. She will join us to speak about her first term accomplishments and plans for their reelection and next term. Lane, the floor is yours.
All right, well, thank you all so much for having me today, for the invitation. It's always good to reflect out loud what it is that we're doing here. And so, Lane Santa Cruz, I'm your Ward 1 council member. I got elected in 2019, 3 months into being in office. The world changed for all of us in so many ways, but we hit into the pandemic. And even though I felt like I understood the pace at which things move in city government, having the pandemic really, threw a curveball on us. Yeah, we tried to figure out how do we engage community in a time unknown certainties, and decided that 2 years into office that we would do a campaign of knocking on 10,000 doors in Ward 1 to hear from neighbors. I know that when I first ran for office, what I heard time and time again at the door was I couldn't be one of those politicians that only showed up around election time, but then they never saw them again. And so that, felt heavy, for me, that folks feel that their relationship with electeds, with government, it's an extractive relationship and not a mutually beneficial one. And so we knocked on 10,000 doors in 2021. Got a lot of feedback about what were the issues that folks cared about, specifically around the condition of the roads, repaving neighborhood streets, safety related issues, lighting, just wanting to kind of activate their neighborhoods and have some more neighborhood pride. So I'm happy that we were able to use that information to then advocate for policies here at the city. But I just kind of wanted to share that to ground us in the conversation that we'll be having today, because I think part of what the dialogue that we brought to the table has been around what does it look like and what does it feel like to embody good governance. I think the right has done a really good job of telling people that the government doesn't work for people. And so the less informed they are, the less active they are, the kind of leave it to corporate capital to get the work done. So I think that government, what we're trying to show, government can and should be working on behalf of all of us, and that we have a lot of work to do to show them that, to show the public that that can happen. And so I wanted to share a little bit about some of like what's been our North Star, our compass, and how we've governed. And so we've looked a lot to the work that's happening in Latin America, specifically here around participatory budgeting, and how it's an entry point to get more people engaged and to feel a sense of agency in deciding how public monies are spent in their community. So that's been a guiding piece for us. The other ones have been in Spain, you have the creation of these super blocks and trying to redirect where car traffic goes to really bring people back to the center of community life and creating spaces for connection for people. I think that that's important, that a lot of times we are in silos or in our own kind of bubble, and how do you bring people out and have conversations about what it is that matters. And then I'm looking at a lot of the transformative transportation and mobility happening in Latin America around improving public transit to be able to move more people using public transportation, making our communities more bikeable and walkable, and really kind of taking a page from the work in Bogota, Colombia, for that. So I wanted to share a little clip with you guys, just to kind of give an example of this.
will solve traffic jams. And clearly, it has never been the case, because what creates traffic is not the number of cars, but the number of trips and the length of trips. So the more road infrastructure you do, the traffic will become even worse. The only way to solve traffic jams is to restrict car use. And the most obvious way of restricting car use is restricting parking. People seem to imagine that parking is a right, almost a fundamental right to be included in the United Nations Charter. Mm-hmm. In our Constitution, there are many rights: the right to housing, the right to education, the right to health, but I don't find the right to park. I don't see any constitution which includes the right to park. So if you ask me where you should park, the mayor can tell them. It's almost as if you ask me where you should put your food or your clothes. This is not a government problem. Before I was mayor, I have never been in a city which hated itself more than Bogota. There was a total lack of self-esteem and lack of hope. So when I was elected mayor, we started investing in people, in sidewalks, in parks, in great schools, in libraries. And also we created a bus-based public transport system. We copied a system from Curitiba, a small city in Brazil. We called it Transmillennium. We gave it a name because buses in most places have a stigma, a bad image of being for the poor. So we had to raise the bus status. Transmillennium bus system actually works much more like a subway on wheels than like a traditional bus. Buses go on exclusive lanes. People pay when they enter the station. When the buses arrive, the station doors open simultaneously with the bus doors. You can get 100 people out and 100 people into the bus in seconds. Many people save up to 2 hours a day, because before they had to be on traditional buses in the traffic jam, and now they can go from one extreme to the other very fast. For the same cost that we could do a 25-kilometer subway, we do 400 kilometers of Transmillennium. These systems are also more flexible. Younger cities don't have such a defined center, and the center is shifting. So if you put a hugely expensive infrastructure such as a subway line, then you may find that the new center in a matter of 20 or 30 years is somewhere else where the subway line doesn't go. This system is very powerful symbol of democracy. The first article in every constitution says that, the first article in every constitution says that all citizens are equal before the law. This is not just poetry. It means, for example, that a bus with 100 passengers has a right to 100 times more road space than a car with one. It's a democracy at war. You can really see that public good prevails over private interest. Let's start this. Okay, here we are in part of the Porvenir Promenade. This is a 24-kilometer pedestrian and bicycle only street which networks very low-income neighborhoods to the richest areas of the city. I think it's a revolution in the way urban life works. This kind of high-quality infrastructure for bicycles increases the social status of cyclists. Before we had bicycle ways, low-income people were ashamed of using bicycles. Now, a high-quality protected bicycle way shows that a citizen on a $30 bicycle is equally important to one on a $30,000 car. And here is something interesting. You can see how the pedestrian and bicycle has pavement and the cars are in the mud. So it's a priority for the pedestrian and for the bicycles. And then later sometime we will pay for the cars. But first, the pedestrians. So this completely shows respect for human dignity for everybody, not just for those who have cars, who normally think they are the important ones in developing country cities. Again, this is democracy at work. Buenas tardes, ¿cómo les va?
All right, so yeah, just looking to the work that's been happening in the South has been, helpful even for myself as I'm thinking about how, how we're showing up. I share often that I never saw myself, being in office or running for office, and a lot of that had to do that it was never something that seemed accessible or within reach. And it's really been, the leadership of women in this community in the city of Tucson that have opened those doors. And I've seen my role as somebody that helps facilitate and helps, build leadership capacities in many of our young people, and especially women. So coming across the work of municipalismo that started a couple of years ago in Spain, and now has spread, throughout Latin America, about what it means to govern from the left, and not just say that, like, even as Democrats, that like anybody that's blue, is good to be in office, but that there are shades, right, of blue. And so who is showing up and aligning with the interests, of our community, and, not selling out to a more neoliberal agenda. So municipalismo is the belief that the city is at the scale of which everyday life is experienced. We're also like the front line of government that the community interacts with. How do we govern from a place of centering people and our environment, the sustainability at the center of how we make decisions? How do we make open and participatory decision-making processes that harness, that collective intelligence of the community? And how do we work with folks outside, of government to build, political power, to build, community power, and really tapping into that as we're coming up with solutions to address the pending, issues and conflicts of our time. I already shared that one. So just to kind of give, a quick synopsis of some of the work that we've been doing while in office, and 3 years in office, has been around affordable housing. And that was one of my campaign platforms, and not just around housing, but communities, because we have a lot of small businesses, a lot of legacy small businesses in Ward 1 that have been around for 40 plus years, but don't actually own the place of business, don't actually, have capital to grow or to adapt to changing markets. But we've been successful in having the city create its own affordable housing development arm, and that's the El Pueblo Housing Development. That just got approved earlier this year through Mayor and Council, so that we no longer have to wait for nonprofit developers to be interested in developing affordable housing, but that we can be proactive. Halfway through our term in office, we were able to push for the city to change its, development code to allow for casitas, or accessory dwelling units, for homeowners. So either to address having access to multi-generational housing, or if homeowners want to use it as an income opportunity for their families, making that accessible to people across the city. Our office works very closely with the Pima County Land Trust, and that's a proven model where the county, the land trust owns the land, but sells the house, the structure, to families. And this is like an opportunity for first-time home buyers, especially, or folks who aren't quite don't quite make enough to be able, to purchase a home. It's like an entryway to own a home. And when they're ready to sell it, they make the profits off of the value of the home, but the land stays, within the land trust. So it makes it affordable in perpetuity for families. And so that's something that we've been
partnering with them on city-owned property, having them not only take over the property, but also develop it for affordable housing. And then pushing for housing first policies, where we're helping folks who are unsheltered have access to dignified housing, regardless of what their personal situation is, when it comes to mental health, drug misuse, or if they have a partner or a dog. In the past, we've known that a lot of our shelter beds had a lot of barriers, so folks would opt out from that. So really pushing for a different way to house our unsheltered. And then around transportation and mobility, we've been fighting hard. We were able to make our transit system free during the pandemic and maintain it. And Mayor and Council is currently looking at the possibility of making that permanent. So that's something that we've been leading the charge on. We think that public transit is a public good, the way that our park system is, the way that police and fire, and that we shouldn't be taxing our most vulnerable, because what we get from fares is less than 8% of what it costs overall to run that transit system. We want to continue to push for safer walking, biking, and transit connections in Ward 1. We have the added challenge of having the I-10 and I-19 really kind of gridlock our community, making it really difficult to move unless you're in a vehicle. So making sure that we are thinking about those safety options. I mentioned earlier about the canvassing we did and what we heard from neighbors about their neighborhood streets and wanting those to get repaved. And so we were, instrumental in pushing for Prop 411 to go completely towards repaving residential streets and adding safety elements to address, the issues of speeding or lighting, or having crossings that were safe for folks to get around. And then finally, kind of codifying our Move Tucson plan that's helping inform how the city's transportation network looks, for decades to come. We also fought hard for small business support. We would hear time and time again, especially from like our women-owned businesses or minority-owned businesses, the challenges that they had navigating, city requirements or licensing, or not knowing how to have access to capital. So I'm really proud that we worked with our Office of Economic Initiatives to have a small business program. So where we're having navigators help small business owners through the process of any kind of city or county licensing, also providing trainings for them on how to scale up their business, or where can they tap into capital. And then, personally in Ward 1, just having roundtables with our businesses along the frontage road or certain corridors like on 12th Avenue, when they're having challenges around safety, and how we can all kind of work together to address them. So those have been really instrumental. And then finally, when I campaigned last time, youth investment was a big, platform issue for me, because having grown up here, I know that my family really depended on a lot of the youth programming that the city and the county had. During the 2008 recession, all of those programs for young people went away. And so it was important for us to bring back youth employment through the city, and creating outreach mechanisms where we're plugging in young people into the city. And so we've been able to do that through our participatory budgeting process, making sure that young people are leading the charge, and also just because it's an important leadership development. And I want to see a lot of them in office when they're ready one day. And then so, finally, kind of like where we're moving, where we see like, why am I running for reelection? I think there's still a lot of work in how the city does, community outreach and engagement. How do we help the public see themselves as informed, as active participants in what happens in the city. We also, with the bonds that we've been able to pass, with the support of our voters, is making sure that that those funding mechanisms are being spread out throughout the city in a fair way. There are older parts of the city with aging infrastructure or failing infrastructure that need to be prioritized. And so I think that's important. We need to continue doing work on increasing our affordable housing stock in the city. I mean, housing generally, but we're at a point where I myself am like stuck renting because I cannot afford to purchase anything. And so that, you know, not only to be able to purchase home, but even for rents to be accessible and affordable for our community members, because we all know that the cost of living has gone up, but people's wages haven't kept up with that. And then lastly, I think it's important to address our fentanyl epidemic. A lot of the challenges that we're seeing out in the community is around drug misuse and overdoses. I think some of y'all might know that I, in 2016, lost my older brother to a fentanyl overdose. And it's been, you know, one of the hardest things that our family's ever gone through. But what it also brought to light for me was that especially, you know, Latino families, there's a lot of shame around talking about addiction or drug use, and that we need to have, you know, hard conversations with family and how do we support each other, and that, you know, drug use comes from a place of trauma and people trying to anesthetize pain. And so what are we doing to address, you know, people's mental health or job and housing situation, then that leads them, you know, to look for a way out. So I think these are, you know, some of the pressing issues that we still have to work on. I don't know how we'll be able to see this. I was just trying to show you my TikTok on I'm Lane Santa Cruz. I am an advocate, educator, a Tucsonense. 3 years ago, I ran to represent Ward 1 to serve as a bridge between City Hall and our barrios in order to realize better futures for our families. As your council member, I have championed and delivered on securing economic relief funds during the COVID-19 pandemic, the creation of low barrier shelter for our unhoused neighbors, the passage of policy legalizing casitas or ADUs. We have reinvested in the city's youth employment programs, have created internal infrastructure to better support small businesses, and we are fighting to maintain fare-free public transit. Together, we have brought more resources and dignity to Ward 1, but we still have more work to do, and that's why I'm running for re-election.
Seriously, Mommy, do we have to do this again? Is this year to knock on doors in the summer?
Yes, Big Waddles, let's re-elect Mommy to Ward 1.
Thank you, Mama, and thank you for your ongoing support. We'll need it again. All right, and then just my pitch to y'all. I know we're about to move into Q&A, but just, you know, how I could use your support would be, you know, signing my petition to get back on the ballot. We have less than 2 weeks before these signatures are due. Helping me qualify as a clean elections candidate by making a $10 plus contribution to the campaign, or, you know, coming out and volunteering with us. So with that, I'll move us to Q&A.
Thanks, Elaine. That was wonderful. Is there a place online that people can give you signatures for your petition and donations for your matching funds?
Yes, and I'll actually just put the campaign website on there, and then you can, all that information will be linked there.
Excellent.
Okay, well, Lane, we're going to have some questions for you from our audience. So, Steve Linder, you have a question for Lane.
Yes, hi, Lane. Let me start with to say that the Republican leadership of the legislature hates Tucson would be an understatement. And so right now they're doing everything in their power to rid cities, counties, whatever, of home rule and people and charters and realize not be able to make any decisions. What is the city council, or you personally, doing about this attack that is going on from the legislature about home rule?
I mean, yeah, the attacks have been ongoing, I would say, for I think since Napolitano, stepped down and we've had, like a Republican control of the state, constantly undermining, the city's ability to, govern itself. And that's been very challenging. I think, I think the latest pieces of legislation is just interesting when it's coming from a place of, oh, some folks don't feel heard. So say in this case, residents on the east side feel like having a Democratic mayor and council is the problem. To then take that to the state level and have people who don't even live in the city get to weigh in on how the city governs itself and makes decisions it's unprecedented. And so I think for my end, it's constantly having conversations, educating folks on I guess the differences between the legislation that the state gets to make versus the city, and how so much of the limitations that we have are set on us by the state legislature, and why those positions are so important, that we shift, who's in office, who's in power at the state level. But I know from our point, what the city's mechanism to be able to address that is usually through the legal court system. And so constantly, working with our city attorney on how we fight back on behalf of the residents of Tucson.
Okay, George Beverly, you have a question for Lane Santa Cruz.
Thank you, Councilwoman Cruz. Great presentation. I have a question about what does the city's stance on the new Senate Bill 1694? It's in Republic. It is in regarding to public monies spent on diversity, equity, and inclusion training, and how that would affect counties and city officials. Do you guys have a stance on that, or have you guys talked about that?
Yeah, no, we don't. We definitely do not support it. Thank you for your question, George. I think also our, I guess more like 2 years ago, our mayor and council pushed to establish an office of equity within the city to normalize, these conversations within, city employees, but also externally about how we interact with the public. That, we're all not a monolith, and we have to be very we have to be informed, right, about the past, like our past, even the city's past histories of discrimination and racism, so that we're not perpetuating that, and that we're celebrating, like our diversity as something that we should be proud of rather than something that we should hide. So that's something that, that our mayor and council take very seriously. And so we, anytime that there's this type of legislation, even like anti-critical race theory or ethnic studies, that we are opposed to them, and make sure that our lobbying group in Phoenix is actively lobbying against them.
Okay, Lucy Messing has a question for you, Lane.
Hi, Lane. Welcome.
Hi, Lucy.
Good to see you. I have a question. I know that the issue with the casitas has not necessarily borne a lot of fruit. There hasn't been a lot done with that. What seems to be the holdup? How can we facilitate that better? And because I know people are looking at that to put their, parents or kids or whatever close to home.
Yes, so we just had a study session item on this last month, and trying to, kind of like an overview of where we're at with the program. So even though we've had a number of them put in a request for permits, none have been built quite yet. So some of the hurdles that we've been hearing from community have been the cost of impact fees and creating an additional unit. And so that's been a hurdle. The other one has been the architecture fees before even getting a plan to submit. And so we're going to be, we gave the city manager direction to come back with recommendations of how we can lessen some of these hurdles, but specifically around the architecture fees. The city was going to start looking into having like 5, like working with an architect to have some 5 very basic pre-approved designs that then community could just say, I'm going to use that design, just to kind of streamline that and make it less expensive. And I think the other piece is also just funding for it. The cost of construction has gone up. So maybe at some point when we first started this conversation, we were like, oh, it might cost somebody between 50 and 70,000 to build a casita. The cost now is around 200,000. So I think cost has also made it really difficult, but we know that there continues to be an interest from families to do that. And we got to, keep figuring out a way to make it financially feasible for folks.
Thank you.
Okay, Mike, Brian, do we have some questions from the chat room?
We do, in fact. I also have a couple of my own, but first, we have a question from Debbie Collazo. I'm not sure how it's pronounced, but she asks, in the Arizona Daily Star, we see Steve Kozachek, Kevin Dahl, and Paul Cunningham are quoted the most. And I guess the background of that question is, what do these guys have in common? And do you avoid the press, or do you feel that maybe there's a bias in the coverage?
I think both. I think I'll say that I'm a little more reserved to be in the press. I think, especially after my experience around the police brutality, outrage that happened in 2020, and how my, showing up for that, just really made me a target. And so I think I'm a little more reserved, but typically if people reach out, to interview or ask for a quote, I try to be responsive. I think the only time that I will say no, if it's an issue that I'm like, they actually should be talking to the mayor, or they should be talking to Paul, because that's something he pushed, so he should be the one getting a quote in on the press. But no, typically I try to be responsive. So yeah, I'm not sure what I can do on my end for that.
Thanks, Lane. We also have a question from Jim Hanley just now. He asks, can you comment on the proposed unified development code that will increase density in established neighborhoods as well as in new developments?
Jim, you're talking about the city's, the city updating its development code?
Yes, I got a alert from a longtime neighborhood organizer, Colette Altifer, about the UDC code changes, and she is concerned particularly about changes in setback, both on between houses, on setback from the street, on the definitions of a townhome versus a single family dwelling unit. The code, residential code, apparently is going to be made considerably more flexible, if you will. This first code change was approved for a development in Hedrick Acres, I believe, if that helps any. And she was calling for comments to mayor and council before today, as a matter of fact. So it's it seems to me that this is another matter where we're trying to cultivate more low-income housing, but we need to be sure that we're not just handing a plum to developers in that quest for affordable housing, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, thanks for that clarification, Jim.
Yeah. No, I think, there's justified concern on that front. And part of our housing shortage that we're having now, and I think that the shift around density is challenging, because I know as somebody who grew up here, people like their space. Everybody likes their view of the mountains, but that comes at a cost as well. I mean, we've seen unprecedented sprawl in Tucson, even in the Phoenix area, which I would argue is worse than what we have here. And so using more of that natural landscape, or those natural resources that really, cities are supposed to be those urban hubs for people. And so the closer we do live together, the better transit systems, the more walkable, the more bikeable, because everything is more closely connected. I do feel like we have what people are calling like the missing middle when it comes to housing. And so like allowing for casitas or ADUs is part of that, or having just different types of housing options. And I would say that we value, going back to that video, parking more than we value being able to have housing.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to flip that. We need to make places more just accessible for people to live close to everything that they need, than continuing to build highways or people to have to commute long distances. I don't think any of that is sustainable or good for our environment. But like you said, we are taking feedback and comments from the public, so it's important to hear from y'all. But that, I think, as somebody who's now having to deal with climate change, with the shortage in housing, with the cost of living being so expensive, we need to get creative. Things can't stay the way that they are currently, because you are going to create a greater margin between the people that have things and the people that don't. And so we need to we need to balance that out.
Yeah.
Hey, Lane, you have 4 minutes to go, right? You've got a hard stop.
Yes.
It's okay.
I have to run
Yeah.
to a different meeting at
Right.
one.
Yeah,
So
I
we're
got
probably-
a couple more follow-ups here for myself, Joe, if you don't mind. I'd like to put in
Sure.
a couple of questions. One is just a very simple, short question. That's what percentage of the price for housing in the land trust is, kind of struck off the purchase price based on the underlying land being owned by the trust?
I wouldn't be able, I don't want to get quoted on this, but I think what I remember from meeting with the Pima County Land Trust, around 20 to 30% is what I understand, but I could totally be off on that one.
Cool. Yeah, we won't hold it over your head.
Yeah.
And the second thing I wanted to learn a little bit more about before you go is the participatory budgeting. I love this idea. I've been pushing it and studying it for a while. I understand it's $400,000. Is that just for your ward, is that a citywide thing or just your ward?
Yeah, that's just in our ward. So each council office has discretionary funds that they can use however they see fit. And so that also came from a push of trying to have participatory budgeting. Other offices maybe weren't quite sure how that would look like, so decided to just, if people make requests from them, they, decide whether or not to fund something. But we thought it'd be great. I don't want to be in a position of telling somebody, yes, I'll fund your project, and no, I won't fund yours. And so how does community kind of generate ideas about what they want to see in their neighborhood and their community, flesh that out, and then put it as a proposal for people who live in Ward 1 to vote on, what they want to fund. So it is the first time. Yeah, this is the first time any city in Arizona has tried to do that. So we're learning a lot, but we're hoping to get started, on the next round in the fall. So if y'all live in Ward 1 or work in Ward 1, and want to, keep an eye out. Would love to have y'all participate in the future.
Awesome.
Okay, well, we are out of time, but Lane, thank you so much for coming today. You put on a video that has given lots of room for thought and ideas to be exchanged, and we wish you all the luck in the coming election. Let's have a
Thank
nice
you so
warm
much.
thank you for Lane Santa Cruz.